Welcome, Bri, to this episode of the Real Women podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be chatting with you again.
Of course, we've gone back and forth throughout the years, and it's so excited to see you. And I mean, we've talked multiple times throughout the years. I think we've done a couple of Google Meets or Zooms or something as well. But it's fun to have you face to face like this and to kind of talk about you and your journey. And I think at the time it was more of what you could do for me. Now I'm here saying, what can I do for you? So
Both versions of the conversation are great, and I'm happy to be a part
absolutely
of them.
cool. Well, we interviewed you. We were just talking about this before we started recording. It was September 2019, uh, several years ago. Why don't
A
we start
lifetime
with
ago, some would say.
literally a lifetime ago? Why don't you start with sharing a little bit about what you've been up to since then? And yeah, like what were you doing at the time and now kind of where you are now?
Yeah, no, I'm glad I'd seen the early one because I was like, oh wow, it really has been a long time. So in September 2019, we were I think we were gearing up to promote the web series I had directed earlier that year,
Oh, wow.
and for a production company based in Salt Lake City. It
Hmm.
was the first time I'd ever directed something I hadn't written, which was an exciting
Oh,
process. It was my first on location shoot that I was not in charge of, so I got flown out from New York to
nice.
Utah. And so it was a 7 episode romantic comedy web series set in on Halloween, or the month of Halloween. So they had scheduled it so that the final episode would go out on Halloween of 2019. So
Uh-huh.
at the time that your interview came out with me, either we were like just starting airing that show, or we were like in the final couple of weeks before we started airing the show.
Okay.
So that was the big project that year, was directing and releasing that web series, called Better With You. You can still find it on the Apple Juice Productions
Perfect.
YouTube channel and also my website, bricastellini.com. If you're ever curious about anything I'm talking about, it's definitely on my website. So Google it. It will not be hard to find. So yeah, so that was what we were doing at that time. I had also just changed jobs,
Mm,
because the company that I was working for, I think when you and I first connected online,
yeah.
Starable had some financial difficulties, and so I was sort of
Uh,
wasn't laid off because they still needed me, but they couldn't pay me. That sort of startup
yeah.
situation, and so
Sure.
I had been looking for other work while I was on set for Better With You, and ended up getting a part-time job that turned into, as of September 1st, a full-time job at Seed and
Oh,
Spark.
wow. Yeah,
So
yeah.
the crowdfunding platform, that I worked for then 4 years, I had I had like literally just started working for in a full-time capacity, having spent the summer doing like part-time stuff for them. So that was the middle of 2019, as we were about to release a web series I directed, and I was starting a new job. And I think I probably was also starting teaching around then too. I was adjuncting for a couple of years, teaching web series and digital production at a couple of different grad programs. And if that wasn't that year, it had started recently enough that it hadn't been a full year yet. Yeah, 2019 was definitely a chaotic year, not always in bad ways. Like, there was
Sure.
some uncertainty, there was shifting, new jobs being picked up. But overall, it was a pretty solid year, and I was really excited for
Yeah.
boding tone here, for 2020,
Uh,
and all that the stability of 2020 would bring me. Um,
right. There it is. Yep.
so, since 2019, something happened in the world. And yeah, so certainly, it was a strange transition, because when I was hired at Seed and Spark full time, one of the reasons I was brought on board is because I was being slated to collaborate and take some of the pressure off of the then head of education, Christina Rea, who was a friend of
Mm,
mine, previously, and then was then my colleague at Seed and Spark. So
yeah.
she was traveling sometimes 2 or 3 weekends a month, like
Oh,
out of
wow.
town, to teach workshops and lead sessions and be on panels and things like that. And she was like, I need a break. I need
Yeah.
to share at least some of this travel with someone. This is too
Yeah.
intense of a schedule. And so part of why I was brought on to Seed and Spark, and it was it's a startup, so of course I was there to do like 8 things, but one of the big
Right.
things
Right.
was
Right. Right.
supposed to be travel, foreboding to, and
Oh,
again. So
sure.
my first two work trips were scheduled for, I think, late March, early April 2020,
Sure. Yep.
after kind of onboarding with the company and like getting into the swing of things. And then of course the pandemic happened. So I never ended up doing any work travel for Seed and Spark until like 2.5 years
Right.
into my job there, once the like
Wow.
pandemic restrictions were lifted, once vaccines had gone out.
Yep.
So a lot of my expectations early on were definitely kind of taken out. But then 2020 turned out to be the year I probably worked more hours than any year previously,
Yeah.
because the deceptive thing for a lot of us who
Yep.
were already remote workers in the pandemic, and I'm sure other people have had this experience, was that, well, suddenly we could work more because we weren't commuting, we weren't
Mm-hmm.
traveling, and we had nothing else to do. So might as well
Mm-hmm.
work. And also, everyone, especially if you were in a creative industry, were so panicked about like, what if the jobs go back?
Yep.
Like we're in a better situation currently, but like this could go away at any minute. So we got to work extra hard to make sure things, stay afloat. Everyone at the company I
Mm-hmm.
was working at had to take a pay cut in order to stay afloat. And so like that
Oh,
also added to the anxiety of like, oh no, I'm already making less money than I expected. And,
yep.
I'm not taking that for granted, but I am also more paranoid than ever. So I was taking on more responsibilities. I was
Yeah.
taking on additional side hustle works all the way through 2021. I, at
Wow.
any given time, had between 3 and 6 jobs at once.
Wow.
And these were things, like I said, I was adjuncting for 2 grad programs for a couple of years. One that was low residency, one that was not, but was based in New York at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
so it went low residency during the pandemic, obviously.
Sure.
Then I was still actually doing some freelancing for my previous company, Starable, and their various activities and festivals. I was doing some freelance teaching for Hoo Ha Ha, the women in comedy platform that
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's a thing anymore, to be honest. I don't hear much about them. But basically, I was doing anything and everything because I
Yeah.
was paranoid, because I was coming off of the sort of uncertainty of 2019 of like unexpectedly losing income for a period of time and being like,
Yep.
I need
Yep.
to deal with this. And so, really, what has defined the past 4-ish years since we last talked was just sort of working too much, frankly, and not entirely at creative things. Thankfully, the past couple of years that has changed a little bit, but
Okay,
certainly the
good.
defining adventures of the last couple of years has been like working really hard and saving as much money as possible, so that if
Yeah.
something happened again in the crazy startup world and creative world that I work in, I wasn't quite so desperate for a job, at least right away. And that turned
Mm-hmm.
out to be a good strategy, because
Good.
in the middle of 2023, I got laid off from Seed and Spark.
Right.
So once again, I was not because I didn't have work to do, but because a company couldn't pay me. I was
Yeah.
once again kind of out in the wind. And so since then, I have been trying to build a solo business so that I have a little bit more control over the whims of it,
Yep.
the marketplace and whatnot. And
Yep.
I haven't been doing it long enough to be able to say with certainty if that's going to be able to continue. But the savings of the 20 jobs that I've done in the past couple of years has certainly been helpful,
Yeah,
because,
sure.
it means that I didn't immediately have to just like go find a barista job to stay
Yep.
afloat. Like I have padding for the first time in my life.
Yep.
And in many ways, the pandemic did help with that, because for a period of time, I was like not spending money other than utilities. And then midway through 2021, me and my then boyfriend, now husband, moved from New York to LA. But
Mm.
in the intermediary couple of months between those two coastal places, we stayed with my mom in Colorado for a couple of months, and so we didn't have any utilities. Basically,
That's
we
good.
paid for
Yeah.
food and that's it. And so we saved a lot of money just being able to
Good.
transition that way.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
like I consider myself very lucky that I was able to keep a job through the worst of all of that, and
Mm-hmm.
sort of deal with that. And I'm grateful that I had that opportunity to fall back on. And I'm grateful now, because it meant that I could take some time to look at like, what do I want my career to look like,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that wasn't tempered with like, you got to make rent, you got to make rent
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
thing. So that's not as creatively exciting, but let's do creative updates now. So I haven't
Yeah. That was my
really been
next
on set.
question. So that's
Yeah.
great.
It's hard because like during the pandemic, most of us weren't making anything, and
Yeah.
those of us who were making something interesting have already talked about it. So yeah, I certainly had a couple of years of famine creatively
Mm.
for the obvious reasons. I haven't I don't think I've been on set since the pandemic. I was on set one time. I guess that's not true. So there were one of my earliest students for one of the MFA programs that I was an adjunct for. She developed a web series in my class that she wanted to finish because you only had to do a pilot for my class, but
Hmm.
she had written I think 6 episodes, and she had like graduated from my class, and at the time I was like much closer in age to the people that I was teaching, and so she and I just became friends outside of the classroom, and then she invited me to be the director of her web series and editor. And so the last set I was on, yeah, I think the last true set I was on was hers, was
Wow.
finishing her web series. Like we filmed one episode right before the pandemic lockdown started, and
Hmm.
then we filmed the final one the day before I left New York
Oh, wow.
permanently. So
Right.
that timing was kind of wild. And
Right.
then it was a couple of years before I did anything else. We released one remotely recorded episode of my web series, Salmon Powder Depressed, which I think the first 2 seasons were out by the time that I talked
Okay.
to you in 2019.
Yeah.
Because of a lot of things. We were bored. We had nothing better
Yeah.
to do. The structure of that web series was always that the two roommates would alternate coming home from therapy and talking about a variety of like therapy subjects.
That's
And
awesome.
during the pandemic, we all were in remote therapy for some of us the
Yeah.
first time. And so there was a lot
Yeah.
to talk about and unpack there and
Yeah.
make jokes about. So we were like, well, we're not doing anything else. Let's, find a way to do this. And at the
Hmm.
time, my co-star was living in Los Angeles. My co-star and co-writer and director were living together in Los Angeles, and I was still in New York, but we
Mm.
pretended like we were in the same place, and so that
Yeah.
obviously required some stuff. And
Yeah.
the other reason we wanted to make the episode is because since the season 2 finale of that show and recording this, my co-star had transitioned, so she was
Mm.
finally presenting as her
Great.
true gender. And so
Yeah.
we wanted to have, because we loved that project so much, we wanted to have at least one like canon episode where she got to be
Yeah.
herself. And
That's awesome.
we wanted to like play with that and make sure that we had some example of it. So I don't consider that a set because it was me and my husband in our apartment just like running around with
Yeah.
my director on Zoom on like a phone nearby, like trying to
Hmm.
give us advice and figuring it out. But yeah, that was the only thing that like I made during that
Okay.
time.
Got it. Got
But
it.
in many ways, like the pandemic forced me to get back into writing, not for the
Oh,
sake of
wow.
immediately going into production, but
Yeah.
writing longer
Sure.
form projects that I had no hope of producing, and kind of developing creative projects that were not like, can I film this with one person in one room kind of
Right.
situation. And that
Right.
was honestly good for me. It unlocked a lot of
Good.
stuff, and I wrote some really, really great scripts in that time,
Good.
and some pilots and that kind of
Oh,
thing.
cool.
And then 2 years ago, fairly unexpectedly, a filmmaker that I know and have appreciated for a long time, she posted a series of Instagram stories about romance novels that she
Uh-huh.
had been reading recently. I
Uh-huh.
didn't realize at the time that she was doing it because she was writing her own, which
Oh,
comes out in a couple of months. So I'm excited for that. Yuling Kwong is the filmmaker. She came from the web series space and
oh,
has
cool.
since gone on to like write and direct for television
Oh,
and
wow.
for features and that kind of stuff. She's a very impressive person and has had the career trajectory that I have sort of accidentally also had.
That's awesome.
So she's just like one step away, like for me in any of these situations. She's so cool. But anyway, she posted this series of Instagram stories about romance novels, and I was like, oh, those are interesting. They
Hmm.
sound kind of good. Maybe I'll check some of them out. And that was the beginning of 2022. By the end of that year, I'd read 366 romance novels,
Wow, that's
and
amazing.
it kind of just like it truly could not have predicted this at all. I'd
Yeah.
also written 3 of my own by the end
Wow.
of that year because, like, around book 60, I was like, I could do this. I want
Yeah.
to do this. I have an
Yeah.
idea for this. And so that has kind of defined a lot of my creative work for the past two
That's
years. I've
awesome.
since written an additional full manuscript, and I'm three-quarters of the way through another one.
Great.
And we talked about this off podcast. I'm taking a
Yeah.
UCLA extension class about
Yeah.
romance writing. So like I couldn't have anticipated a hard pivot back to prose when I had run off
Yeah.
from prose after college. But it's been really fun to kind of re-explore writing that I haven't done in a long time and find a whole new creative community to join and be a part of as both a creator and a consumer.
Yeah.
And then in the meantime, the only real script writing that I've done in the past couple of years has been co-writing projects. So I co-wrote a feature film last year with Christina Rea, in fact, the woman I
Oh,
worked with
very
at Seed and
cool.
Spark,
Yeah.
who then I went on to host a podcast with and is one of my
Yeah.
best friends. She and I wrote a feature film about two, like, what's I would say two disaffected female filmmakers, loosely based on ourselves, who investigate a peer of theirs for murdering his wife because they're professionally jealous of him and
That's
they want to
hilarious.
take him down one way or another. So it's sort of a
Yeah.
satirical kind of industry black comedy, very like Hollywood Rear Window kind of is how we've been
Yeah.
pitching it,
I
and
love
it was very
that.
fun, extremely
Okay.
fun to make. We're not sure if anyone's going to like it because anyone who would give us money to make it, we are explicitly like taking down or making fun of in the
Oh,
text of the
that's
film.
funny.
But it was a really fun creative exercise for us. I'd never written a feature before. I was
Okay.
exclusively short form or
Yep.
TV. And then since then, she and I have started kind of beating out another screenplay we might want to work on together. I've got a rom com project in the works with some other friends. And so it's been an interesting shift from like solo short form writer
Yeah.
to solo novel writer and collaborative feature writer. And
Yeah.
my new mantra has just been I'm trying not to police the muse. If the muse wants to write prose, that's what we're going to do. I'm not going to
I
worry
love
about like
that.
is this valuable to the career strategy I have developed? Like
Yeah.
I tried to do that for a long time and I just found it so stifling and
Yeah.
frustrating. And if I enjoy what I'm working on and I'm actively working on things, then who am I to be mad that I
Yeah.
suddenly have to learn a bunch about the publishing industry again, you know?
So would you say then that that's kind of a theme for you is don't police the muse? And like if you were to go back to, almost 5 years ago now, 4.5 years ago, like would you tell that to yourself at the time? Is that a lesson that you've learned? Or is it just
I
something
think
you've kind of learned now?
I think I've been learning it for a long time
Okay.
because like 2019, 2020, even pre-pandemic, were very much I was because of the sort of like financial insecurity that I was feeling,
Mm-hmm.
I overcompensated a lot
Mm.
in like finding all those jobs. Like I mentioned that 2020 and 2021, I worked more than I'd ever worked before, like
Yeah.
to the point where my New Year's resolutions were take at least 2 days off a month.
Oh my
And
gosh. A
that
month.
doesn't,
Wow.
but like, I told that to a friend of mine and she was like, do you mean like in addition to the weekends? And I was like, no, no, no,
That is
including
the
weekends
weekend. So
because
basically
I
a
had
weekend a month.
exactly. And I probably wasn't going to make them consecutive because
Sure.
like, and like I truly took maybe 2 to 3 days off a month for two
Wow.
years.
Wow.
And because I had the New Year's resolutions, because I could see the writing on the wall of like, I am doing something deeply unhealthy, but I'm too scared about not having money to not do this. So I can at least
Right.
maybe try to wrangle one day every couple of weeks for myself. But as a result, I didn't have time to police or not police the muse because I was barely writing for those first couple of years just because I was
Got it.
working so much. I was teaching or I was consulting or I was, one of a million other
Yeah.
things, and working at my full-time job that also
Yeah.
had more hours than ever. And
Right.
so yeah, for a little while, it was just having a muse at all would have been a miracle. And then
Yeah.
once I kind of climbed out of that sort of workaholic mindset, once I'd saved enough money to feel like secure enough to maybe like take a deep breath, that's when naturally, when you have time with
Yeah.
your brain's like, ooh, I want to create things again. And
Yeah.
so it was a little bit easier because I was just excited to be excited about something again and not
Mhm.
feel sort of like the weight of responsibility before
Mhm.
doing something that, like, as long as I was writing, I wasn't gonna say
Yeah.
anything to my brain. So I think it was sort of a, to answer your question, I think that the not policing the muse mentality has largely come out of not policing myself so that I have a muse at all.
Yeah.
I before all of this, I would have definitely needed to go back in time and tell myself, like, you need to relax. But I think it sort of
Yeah.
all happened fairly organically, where it was just like I was so relieved to be wanting to write, period, that
Mhm.
whatever
Yeah.
was coming out of me, I was like, as long as it's good and I'm having a good time, what else am I doing here?
I love that. As you're thinking about the last several years, is there something that you've learned that you know now that you wish you could have told your 5 years ago self?
I wish I had known earlier that the work I was doing didn't deserve as much of me as I gave it.
Mm,
And like that, like I said, that kind of like came towards the end, like the end of 2021. Was more burnt out than I'd ever been in my life.
yeah.
I was miserable, I was sick, I had a pervasive like 6 month long cough
Oh,
that was not
wow.
COVID, but just related to like stress and
Stress.
overwork and like my immune system being shot because I was not
Yeah.
sleeping and I was working so much. And like that, there were a lot of causes for that, but a big one was that, like, in addition to the sort of just like baseline financial insecurity fears, there was also very much still that like Protestant work ethic,
Yeah.
American capitalism work ethic that was,
Yeah.
I hadn't
Yeah.
unpacked yet. So
Yeah.
like everything that I was doing, I was giving 150% on, because like I
Yeah.
wanted to do a good job. I wanted to have pride in my work. And I don't think any of those things are a bad thing, but not all of the places I was giving 150% to deserved
Yeah.
it, nor did any of that 150% actually make it to like the goalpost. It was usually I was doing a lot of work, presenting it to the people who were in charge of like allowing that work to better anyone's lives or go anywhere, and then they were blocking me, or they were
Right.
so disorganized that it turned out it was all like moot to begin with. And
Yeah.
I wish I knew a little earlier, like, you can emotionally detach. Your identity does not need to be tied to how far ahead you are on your OKRs or whatever. Like, give your this job is paying you this much. Do
Yeah.
that much work.
Yeah.
It'll still
Yeah.
be good. You're good at your job.
Yeah.
So do the job, but stop going above and beyond for people who don't deserve it.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. So
And
as we're kind of
that's
go.
creative too. For the
Oh,
record, like,
sure.
I'm certainly talking about like my paying work that was more sort of like creative adjacent, but like
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
also learned that, a lot of the problems that I would have in indie production were related to like people just not being on the same page or taking it
Yeah.
as seriously as each other. And I was
Yeah.
almost exclusively the person who took things the most seriously, and that's a lot of pressure to put on
Yeah.
yourself, not to mention your collaborators. And sometimes, even if it means a project doesn't get made in the timeline you hoped or doesn't get made at all, it's not worth ruining your like brain and friendships because like you have to do the perfect job at everything. Some
Mm-hmm.
projects, if you require other stakeholders for them to succeed and the other stakeholders are not going to meet you halfway, you do
Yeah.
not need to meet them 75% of the way. It's
Yeah.
not worth it.
Yeah.
Don't do that to yourself. Don't create that like culture of resentment. If they want to work with you, meet them exactly halfway and wait for them to get there. Don't keep moving the goalpost closer and closer and micromanage people to death. It is
Yeah.
not good for anyone involved, and least of all the project you're working on. So,
Yeah.
like, take a step back. This is not your identity. There's always going to be another project. Just because you're really
Yeah.
excited about this one doesn't mean that it is the end all be all of everything. And putting that pressure on an individual like piece of work is only going to end badly, even if
Mm-hmm.
everything goes perfectly. There
Yeah.
always is going to be another project. Remember that.
Yeah. So as we finish up, I have everybody share two things with the community. The first one is is there something you can give to the community? And it could be something very, very simple. It could be a follow on Instagram. It could be reading somebody's script and giving notes. It could be anything. There's something you can give to the community. But in return, the second question is, what would you like if somebody in the community had the one thing that you need right now in this moment to get to the next step, whatever that is for you? What would that be?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I can give to the community is time and a ton of free resources. I have a Calendly link on my website, bricastellini.com/consultations, that'll get you a free 15-minute call with me that I almost always go over on. So you're almost certainly getting more than 15 minutes with me. And because I have written fairly extensively on a number of filmmaking and production and distribution subjects, I, after a conversation, always try to collect a handful of
That's
those
awesome.
resources that seem like they would be useful to whoever I've talked with. Of course, I hope you go on to hire me in a more official capacity as a consultant or strategist. But even if you can't, I'm happy to talk to anyone for 15 to 20 minutes. And you have my email from then on. And I love answering little questions here and there. I ideally would get to a point where I can help anyone I want, regardless of financial position, and not need to worry about my own rent. So I'm trying to put that motivation and intention into my work early so that I can build that reputation as I go and become more financially secure. So what I can give you is my time and a organized brain of all the things that are also going to be free after that conversation. Also, I have a crowdfunding workshop. It's not free. I think it's the point at which this episode comes out. Tickets are $10, but I'm teaching a 2-hour crowdfunding workshop with everything I've ever learned about crowdfunding in it. And for that $10, you get access to that workshop. You get all of the slides that I'm presenting, and you get my email list template that you can customize and build for yourself. That also comes with a mail merge walkthrough, and mail merge by far is the most useful program I've ever used.
Okay.
So
$10.
It's a lot of bang for your buck. $10 for crowdfunding from soul sucking to success, February 8th, 4:30 p.m. Pacific time. So
we should
definitely
have a conversation about you upping that price. That's amazing. And I do want to mention to folks that you do lots of classes.
I do.
This is and it's not that you teach these classes, you've actually done it yourself, specifically when it comes to crowdfunding and trying to get those funds for whatever project you're working on. And so this is one of those classes. Do you have other classes you do that you want to quickly share? And then, of course, we'll share out all of the links to all of this. But also, folks, $10. Let's just talk about that for a second. But yeah, go ahead. What else? What are some other classes that you do?
Yeah, so I have 5. Most of my classes are live at the minute, although I'm working on recording video on demand versions. So I do have video on demand versions of my Producing 101 course, which is a 5-course suite. You can either take individual classes; they're broken down by the different phases of production, or you can take the full class for a discount if you buy all of them at once. So that's a class that's built for first-time producers. Usually it's taken by writers and actors who really want to make their own work, but don't have the producing vocabulary to put all of the pieces together outside of their ordinary contribution. So the class is designed to prepare you for production, even if you have zero experience. And so that's available on my website, video on demand. Then I have classes for professional branding and pitching and networking. And I'm doing those with a number of people over the course of the next couple of months. I'm teaching my pitch workshop with New Filmmakers LA in March and early March.
Great.
I'm teaching my professional branding class with Pano, formerly NYC Women Filmmakers, in I think July. And then I'll be at Holly Shorts for a couple of things. Officially, I will be there for a networking for introverts workshop, but I think I'm having coffee with someone from there tomorrow. I think I'm going to do another probably crowdfunding session through Holly Shorts at their event in August as well. So keep an eye on my Instagram, Castellini Film School, where I will promote all of that stuff once it has official ticket links and all that kind of stuff. But $10 on Thursday, February 8th, that's when my next, at least, crowdfunding workshop is going to be. So definitely check in.
Yeah, and I am going to have you back on a couple times, actually.
Yeah,
we've agreed, right? No, just to share a little bit about some of these courses that you're doing, give kind of some snippets for folks to understand the value that they'll get from it. And so
Mhm.
I think what you're doing is really important, especially not just for first time filmmakers, but for anybody looking to get that funding, get their project started. Networking, that's huge.
Learn how to talk about it more
Exactly.
impressively. That I feel like most of the disconnect between incredibly talented filmmakers who haven't seen the success they want yet and incredibly talented filmmakers who have is an
Mm-hmm.
ability to communicate
I
about
love that.
their goals and
Yep.
their intentions. And so a lot of my
Yeah.
workshops are about breaking down like the sort of amorphous who am I as an artist kind of stuff and
Yeah.
making it really concrete. Like, these are the questions you need to answer. These are the things that you need to have prepared. This is how
Yeah.
to start a conversation with someone. Like, that's what I try to
Yeah.
focus on, is like making it
That's so
really
great.
actionable and not just like, just do it. Be
Yeah, yeah,
passionate and
yeah.
authentic. Like, what does that mean? I'll tell you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this has been so awesome. Bri, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks
This
for
isn't the
having me.
last time we'll see you, of course.
I hope not.
Uh,
I am here to be continue talking. Please continue letting me talk.
Good. Well, and we'll have this come out on Tuesday morning, and so we'll obviously share
Great.
this out. So folks listening to it when it comes out Thursday is your class, and
Hmm.
so go ahead. We'll give you all the information so you can sign up. $10, folks. $10.
It's
Uh,
a wild
Definitely
deal.
worth it. Definitely worth it. So okay, cool. Well, thank you, Bri, and so excited to have you back on.
Thanks again.